Hello, today is Wednesday, December 11th. This is the Cluster API Office Hours meeting. Cluster API is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle, and we do have an agenda document with our meeting etiquette, which includes using the raise hand feature of Zoom if you have anything you'd like to say. And please add yourself to the attending list. And finally, if you do have discussion topics or PSAs or demos, feel free to add that to the agenda. And this meeting is being recorded. First up, we do have something that I think I had wanted to do last week and didn't realize it until about midway through the meeting. But if there's anybody who is new and who is interested in introducing yourself, we would love to have you say hello. It's not required, so if you don't feel like doing it, that's great too. But I'll give a few seconds to see if anybody's interested in saying hi. I see, is it Flammer? Is that how it's pronounced? Close enough. Sure.
More or less, it's Flamor, but don't worry. A lot of people have tried and failed. So hello, I'm Flamor. I work for JP Morgan, and I'm interested in contributing to the Cluster API project.
Welcome, and thank you.
Hey, hello. This is Jun. I'm from Spectral Cloud. We are a small startup focusing on Kubernetes management as well, and we are building tooling around the Cluster API or the sub project.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you for introducing yourself. All right. I don't see anybody else with hands up, so let's move on to PSAs. We have two here. I'm guessing Vince wrote the first one. Is that right?
I had added that one, Andy.
Or Jason?
I mainly added that as a heads up, especially for folks who are involved with the downstream infrastructure providers, because this does introduce some changes that need to be made on the provider side. So Bootstrap data can now be provided or is now generated as a secret rather than just being text in line for the machine resource. So it improves our security, but it does create additional burden on the providers now that they need to retrieve that secret, and they need to also make sure that if they're passing it into Cloud-init like we did in the AWS provider, that you may need to actually base64 encode the data after you retrieve it from the secret, because Client Go is nice and it automatically base64 decodes the secret data for you.
Thanks, Jason. Got a couple comments here. Andrew, I think you were first.
Jason, oh yeah, Andy, thank you. Jason, you said I may be being pedantic here, but your choice of words, you said you can use. Does that imply that it's still available in the old location as well, or it's exclusively now as a secret?
I should have said that it is now exclusively as a secret. There is one catch in that if the v1 alpha 2 type is updated to v1 alpha 3, the data is still present in the Bootstrap data field, just to be able to continue backwards conversions for those upgraded resources. If you create it as a v1 alpha 3 resource, you will only have the data in the secret.
So there is no thing in the controllers that says, oh, I see that this machine has it there and it doesn't move it away, like if it's an upgraded resource?
It will actually create a secret for it, but it will also leave the Bootstrap data populated to allow that downward conversion. Because if you create it with v1 alpha 3 and it only has a secret, those resources are blocked from being converted to v1 alpha 2.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand, but okay, sounds
good. So basically, both fields are still present. So
yeah,
the original Bootstrap field, or the data field, there's also data secret name, and the cluster API controllers like machine and cluster, whatever's using, I guess, machine controller, is looking for the data secret name now. the KubeADM Bootstrap provider has been updated to support migrating from the inline data string field to a secret for a one-way forward conversion from Alpha 2 to Alpha 3.
Yep.
And Kappa is the first one we've updated to support this change. And Kappa has been updated so it only works with the secret in master now.
Yeah, and my confusion was when Jason said, oh, I think you were just being technically correct that it still exists, but no one should rely on that or use it at all.
No, and the changes that we made actually like don't support it. So we migrated, but we don't look at it anymore. And this is like written down in the V1 Alpha 2 to V1 Alpha 3 required changes for infrastructure providers.
And I'm assuming in V1 Beta 1 or V1 Alpha 4, whatever it ends up being, that the old field will just be dropped at that point.
Yeah, it'll be probably removed. Yeah, the comments also say so.
Great. Just not a problem. Just making sure I understood it.
Tim.
So I have a question about like parliamentary procedure for release notes generation. This sounds like an action required. I would love to have the release notes auto-generated for a release so that we could have a full description with details as part of the PR. So when if a PR goes in, they have the details, that these are the action required for V1 Alpha 3.
Yeah, it's in this document. This is not a user-facing change from an action standpoint because we migrate automatically if you're using the KubeADM Bootstrap provider. So assuming you upgrade from Alpha 2 to Alpha 3 and everything's deployed and running and you're using the KubeADM Bootstrap provider, then things will just work. But it is down here at the bottom in this section here.
But I mean, if they're not using the Bootstrap provider, the KubeADM Bootstrap provider, it will be a change that's not auto-migrated. They just need to be aware of it. So is there a section that says action required or something?
I mean, I think that we are going to need to curate the release notes for Alpha 2 to Alpha 3 when we come out with the first 0.3 release. And, from, like I said, if you're using the KubeADM Bootstrap provider, there's nothing you have to do. If you are writing a Bootstrap provider, so I see Spencer's here, Talos, for example. If you want to support auto migration, you would want to do something similar to what the KubeADM Bootstrapper does, which is migrate. But if you're an end user, you generally aren't going to need to do much there. Vince?
I was going to add, like, if you actually do have like a custom data though, there's not going to be like any automatic migration. We can probably add something to it, or as Tim said, we could just like add it in the release notes. But this document is tracking the breaking changes, then we have to distill it down once we write the release note. Yeah.
We do also have an open issue about the release notes process. I can go dig it up, but there is one about trying to make it better. All right, next up, Jason, workflow for the KubeADM control plane.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring attention to folks that we are well on the way to implementing the control plane KEP now. And the PR link there in the notes is to the actual first start of the real implementation. Everything so far has been scaffolding, but this actually enables the ability to stand up the initial instance for a KubeADM-based control plane. So if you have interest in that, please take a look. And I'm hoping that as soon as that gets merged, we'll be able to start kind of unblocking some of the additional work that needs to be done, where we can start implementing the additional features in parallel instead of having to do it serially.
Thank you, Jason. I don't see anybody's hands up, so let's go on to discussion topics. First one here is creating a project roadmap. So this is an issue that I opened, I guess, on Monday, and was largely just looking for input on if people think that having a roadmap in some shape or form would be useful for the project, where the intent would be to only have high-level big ticket features in the roadmap, and we wouldn't have every single thing that we'd be doing in a milestone, just so we can keep track of what's coming in the current release, the next release, and grab bag of all the other things that we might want to do going forward. So if you haven't seen this, please take a look and add your thoughts. And if anybody's got anything to discuss now about this, I'd be happy to chat about that as well.
How did you want to do this? Did you want to just comment on the issue, or do you want to have a separate sort of like little, maybe a topic of conversation to follow up next week about high-level things people would like?
So this particular GitHub issue was really a question about, should we have a roadmap? And then assuming the answer is yes, I didn't really have anything super concrete in mind. Like, I have a list of items that I'm interested in seeing in the next couple of releases, and I could stick them in a Google Doc, I could put them in a pull request, I could put them in an issue. So I don't know, whatever you think makes sense, Tim.
I think a Google Doc for now, so anyone can have group access to edit, so they can just add what the things that they're interested in are.
From a process perspective, how do we focus on making sure that we talk about what should be in scope for a given release, and not focus on debating the specifics of how the proposed features are implemented and what they should, what's in scope for them?
It's all about who's going to work on it. I mean, we could do that after we have the roadmap, I think, or have the high level things or feature set that people want. And then we could talk about parliamentary procedure, how we execute. But I do think one of the things that this sub-project has suffered from is that the shared awareness gets this sort of deadlock state where people aren't aware of a longstanding issue, and then they want to chime in because they feel like they haven't been involved. But like, usually we should have a backlog. If we have the roadmap and these high level issues kind of spread out over time, it should be a fait accompli for the next release of like, people XYZ have committed to a feature, then they have the proposal in tow and ready and pre-vetted even before the release starts.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think it's more like, so, we're working on Alpha 3, Cluster API 0.3 right now. We have not had any discussions about what comes in the next minor release after this one. And that's more what I'm focused on in terms of trying to not have endless debate on this, that, or the other thing, and more just try and focus on like, here's something, and I'm interested, we are interested in doing it in 0.4, and I don't know, just not going around in circles like we've done in the past on what should be in a release or out. Vince, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I like the idea of like a markdown document in the repo that like everybody can PR, and we can put it at the top. Like, if you want to add something that you want to work on, please open a PR for this. And then, like when people open a PR for it, like there is kind of like an understanding like someone's going to work on it, otherwise it's going to drop out. But I would like to make that clear. I think Google Docs is fine for like just like generic collaboration, but I would rather not have that for the roadmap, because we'll spend like so much time discussing.
Oh no, like, I don't mean in perpetuity. I mean for an initial seed, right? Just like to seed the conversation, then PR it, and then everything from that point on is a PR.
I was just thinking we could just get the backlog of things that we already said we're going to work on for next releases, and like do that as the seed for the markdown document, and then work on it like, in next iterations or something.
All right, well, we will either share a Google Doc or open a pull request with some initial ideas. Any ideas are welcome in terms of features once we have either the Google Doc or the pull request open. And I will follow up with the group once we have figured out what we're gonna do. All right, next up we have moving forward with node remediation from Alberto.
Hey, Andy. Yeah, I just wanted to sync up on the machine health checking proposal. Thanks everyone who shared feedback so far. See if there is any objection to move forward with that, and if we are happy with it, what should I do next, or how can I help to move it forward?
Sure, I know I had looked at it and it seemed reasonable. I think I approved it. Vince, you had said you were gonna take another pass at it maybe last week. I don't know if you'd gotten a chance to look at it, but
I'll do that today. I haven't had the time, to be honest.
I think we can set lazy consensus, perhaps, starting now for a week, and reconvene next Wednesday. And if there's no major blocking comments, merge the proposal and let it go forward. Does that sound fair?
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
All right, so lazy consensus starts now, expires in 1 week on 12/18. All righty. And Tim says, feel free to do proof of concepts asynchronous as well. And I will echo that. Okay, Michael, node maintenance lock. What do we got here? Michael, did you want to go over this?
Sure.
Oh, there you are.
Yes, we talked last week about some power operations that we'd like to implement, and I touched on very briefly the idea of having some kind of lock mechanism so they don't have multiple components stepping on each other's toes. And I thought about this for a while. It seems to be a need larger than just Cluster API. It'd be super great if there was a Kubernetes-wide thing to say, this node is currently having some disruptive thing going on. It's being done by this component, and you should not do anything to this node while I have this lease or lock. And so that's what this is. It's a proposal to create an abstraction using the lease object in the coordination API. It's currently used for like the node lease, kubelet updates like heartbeat or whatever. And so similarly, we could use a similar object that would be, totally opt-in, and, things could look to see if something has that lease, and if not, acquire it, do its thing, release the lease, etc. And I've got a couple use case scenarios in there. The reason I think this is probably best done on the node is because, well, not everybody might be using Cluster API stuff, and we want to play well with the larger community of components, and I think this is the right place for it. So just something I wanted to share here. Maybe this is something other people have been thinking about. I think given our particular use case of trying to automate node lifecycle, it's probably very relevant.
Thanks, Tim.
I like it. Did you want to turn this into like a proposal soon? I'm generally in favor of it.
As far as writing an actual KEP? Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
And we could put it into the roadmap.
Yes.
Is this something that would have to go into Kubernetes proper, or could it be done just on top of a cluster? I'm thinking about compatibility and like minimum supported Kubernetes versions for Cluster API to be able to take advantage of something like this.
Well, I think there's a couple different routes we could go. I'd like it to live in Kubernetes proper. but it's totally optional behavior, and probably just need to get feedback from everyone to see what they think is best. One possibility is get or create if this lease doesn't exist. The other possibility is Kubernetes starts creating at some point, and well, I see both those scenarios working together. So then it's just a question of what namespace should this live in, and what it should be named, and if it's actually broadly useful.
But it is generally adding objects to etcd essentially that like you could presumably, I'm guessing, build a prototype out of tree and put this in, right?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. Andrew?
Is this entirely different than the proposal, the issue that I submitted a while back about maintenance? I mean, that was specific to CAPI components, but it doesn't have to be. And I mean, the same basic underlying desired state is the same, that nothing bothers those resources, no controller touches those resources while some bit is flipped until that bit is flipped back.
I think this is built on that idea. Like we have the same kind of thing we want to do downstream, put nodes in the maintenance so other people can't touch them. And after
Call
a lot
it the
of
MC Hammer annotation.
excuse me,
The solution should be called the MC Hammer solution. You can't touch this.
Yeah, that's a great name.
But yeah, here Andy brought up the issue. Whether it's with a lease or not, I mean, I think I agree with you. It would be great if there was a Kubernetes wide something, annotation, label, lease, whatever, that if it was in place, no one touched the thing that lease or something covered.
Yeah, I went around in my head a lot, and downstream we went around a lot about where this thing should live, and that we were talking about maybe making a server-side drain and taking drain away from the machine controller totally, and we have this other thing called the machine config operator, which basically updates stuff on disk, and having to coordinate all this stuff to this third party. And well, maybe that would be a good primitive to build on top of something like this. It's very opinionated, and so we just need a place where everybody can coordinate, because not everybody's going to be using Machine API, and they're going to want to have these other automated components that do things to nodes generally. And they don't want to have to update those components to worry about stuff like the Machine API they're not using. But yeah, I think it's coming from a common standpoint. I think we probably are all thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I think there's a slight difference. I mean, just in terms of scope, which maybe that's not particularly meaningful, but the proposal you have, Michael, is about nodes, and the issue that Andrew opened is about cluster API resources like machines and AWS machines and vSphere machines. So I don't know if it would make sense to try and have a generic type of facility where you could essentially grab a lease on any type of Kubernetes resource, or if it makes sense to treat them differently.
Well, I think there may be room for layers below the node layer, specifically at the cluster API or machine layer, that it might make sense to have some kind of locking at that layer as well. But from like a high level, I think the node is probably the right place for this. And if everything that's trying to do something to a particular machine checks that lock, then, you know, they're kind of directly related. And if something that doesn't know about machines checks that lock, you know, it's everybody's looking at the same place. So that's my
there is a difference for if we need to move. So if we have a management cluster that's got cluster API bits in it, and we need to move those to a different management cluster. That's essentially what Andrew's issue is supporting. So I do think that there are different use cases here. All right. Anyways, Tim, you want us to move on?
Well, I just think there's a lot of comments. I think it's better served if we try to rally those comments on the issue, just so it's kept for posterity.
Sounds fair. Yeah, I'd say, Andrew, take a look at the lease aspects versus an annotation and see what that looks like. All right. Next up, machine pool lazy consensus. I don't have the link to this right here, but it's been a week and this has been open for a long time. So I figured we could probably go ahead and do this together. I haven't seen any blocking comments. We do have some approvals here. So I think unless there's any last minute objections, we're just gonna LGTM this. Michael, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I went through this the other day, and it seems like we're trying to build a provider agnostic thing here. Is that true?
It would follow the same pattern of having a generic type machine pool and then a reference to a provider specific, AWS Autoscale group, Azure VMSS, or whatever.
Yeah, and just I'm not convinced that split type thing is a good fit for this particular thing, because they're all pretty different. But I just had a question. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the proposal, it does talk about the required shared behaviors and functionality and expectations for the providers in terms of replica counts and that sort of thing. So it does cover commonalities that are expected across the different implementations. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and this has LGTM, so let's approve it. And we can start getting this to go in. Alrighty. Andrew, you have a cluster cuddle status pre-V2 topic here.
Yeah, just a quick question. So as we start to update Cat V for V1A3, and we need to start doing testing, we thought, well, we can still use a static machine to do a non-load balancer deployment while we're doing some, testing. And then it occurred to me, only this morning, so maybe this is a real easy answer here, but does cluster cuddle currently on master, is that where the work for V2 is happening, cluster cuddle V2, or does cluster cuddle on master work currently to deploy clusters? And or would cluster cuddle V1 from the previous release work, because it's probably tied to the V1A2 types? So that's my question.
Fabrizio or Vince, do you want to take that one?
I don't fully understand the question, but cluster cuddle currently on master will focus on V1 Alpha 3, and it assumes you bring your own cluster. So
okay.
Probably it is not the right choice for you.
Okay, so I guess then, would it be worth having a cluster? I could compile it myself, but basically a cluster cuddle that's just the cluster cuddle from V1A2, but with updated types, so that if you weren't, because the cluster cuddle V2 is not going to be ready for a bit, right? And so it would be nice if we could continue to use cluster cuddle the way we have, but while we're doing the V1A3 work on our own branches, on our own providers. If that's something that should be handled per developer, and we can do that ourselves, that's fine. But
Is this mainly around testing?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Okay, in that case, have you looked at the EDE testing stuff that Chuck has been putting together? It should provide libraries in Core Cluster API v1 Alpha 3 that you could use for kind of replicating similar behavior to what ClusterCuddle used to do.
Actually, I was talking with him yesterday about that, but yeah, I'll have to dig in deeper to that. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
If you want to sync after and ask questions or something, Andrew, we can do that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.
All right, and
Andy, sorry, I just add that as soon as we can get ClusterCuddle v2 ready for being used by developer, the better for everyone. So I will try to push it.
Okay, thanks. And Warren posted a link in chat to a tracking issue, get it up here, for the EDE testing framework. So if y'all haven't seen this, I imagine this is probably what Andrew and Chuck will be syncing up on. Okay, any other discussion topics before we move on to backlog grooming? All right, I don't see anything. So let me get my browser back here. All right, so there are 12 open issues that do not have a milestone, and I'm gonna start at the bottom. We did talk about this one last week, and I don't remember why I didn't give this a milestone, but I don't see this happening within the v1 Alpha 3 timeframe. So I'm going to do long-term and next, and at the beginning of the next cycle, we'll retriage all the next ones. Yes, Andrew.
I can say, Andy, that coming from some of the projects on which I'm working, this is actually a high priority. I even sent you tagged you in a JIRA from VMware's internal tracker saying this is high priority, but that was like as the meeting was starting, so I doubt you would have seen this. But yeah, maybe we can sync offline about this and see if it, yeah.
Yeah,
thank you.
Definitely. Okay, ClusterCuddle pre-pull images. Fabrizio, you're gonna do this as part of the V2 work, right?
Yes, it's just for seeking for approval that this is a good idea.
Okay. I'm just reading this. Yeah, I think this is something we should be doing. Use EDE test framework. Yes, we should be doing that. And thank you, Warren, for working on this. Document logging standards. Yes, I think we should do this. So what we have, I guess, not necessarily discovered, but come to realize after lots and lots of debugging is that if you're writing a controller and you return an error, or even if you log an error, that it's not anything that's visible to the user. And if you are just returning an error without logging it where it occurs, it bubbles back to a single log line in some of the controller runtime code, and it will log the error message, but it doesn't tell you where the error came from. So this is a recommendation from a developer standpoint within Cluster API to make sure to try and log where the error occurs. Andrew?
Sorry, I keep jumping in.
Right.
I posted an issue in chat. I filed this issue a while back. Basically saying it'd be nice to be able to return an error that doesn't make something enter the backoff queue. I need to kind of follow up on this. With Go 113 allowing you to include the error or even print stack trace with line numbers, it may be nice if we could push this into controller runtime. So if there is an error, you can in some way return it and say, well, this shouldn't enter the backoff queue, but we would like this logged, and that would be a nice standard way to handle the logging of the error.
My understanding was that the Go 113 error changes does not or do not include stack traces.
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of the errors package then. I have to double check.
Yeah, so Dave Cheney's errors package will do the stack traces, but I believe they left it out of 113, which
Yes, you're correct.
yeah, doesn't make it super useful. Michael?
Yeah, I think we're doing something similar, maybe a little different. We're detecting some things, particularly in the machine controller and the actuators, when we consider a failure, like failed state. So for instance, if like you specify an invalid AZ, we're going to log that, and that's all we're ever going to do. And there's nothing more that that machine can do. You got to delete it. And so we don't actually return an error to controller runtime. We just return like the empty set or whatever, and it stops queuing it.
Yep. Yeah, so this is just about making sure that we have information and guidance like what you just said in the developer documentation for CAPI. All right, this is allowing the content of a file to come from a config mapper secret for the kubeadm Bootstrap provider for the files that are written to disk in the machines. And there is an open PR for this. We're still talking about the data model. So if you all are interested in the API here and the proposed changes, one thing that you'll see is a discussion about how to deal with modeling this. And I would recommend taking a look at this. I'm going to stick this in the milestone mainly because there's an open PR, and I think if we can work through the data model, this will make it into the release. All right, support clusters without external control plane endpoints. Oh, Fabrizio, I see your hands up. Is this on the previous?
Yes, just a quick question. Note of the previous one is that this will impact also pivot / move. So please, when designing the data model, keep in mind also pivoting. Okay.
Yeah, that's at least for move, since we're not doing full pivot, but they're basically the same thing. Yeah, let me put that on. Actually, would you mind commenting on 1860 about needing to take into account?
Yes, I'm going to comment.
Thank you. All right, so back to this one about supporting clusters that don't have a load balancer or a stable endpoint in Alpha 3. I probably need to amend or adjust my comment here based on some discussions with Andrew, where I think there's probably nothing stopping an infrastructure provider in Alpha 3 from doing things the way that are done currently, where there is no, you don't necessarily have to have a stable endpoint, although it makes HA and upgrades fairly difficult or impossible. But as long as you're not using the kubeadm control plane, I think you can keep doing what's done in Alpha 2.
I think we agreed that there would be no indication that you would support upgrades, and it would really be more from a developer perspective while we're trying to work around load balancing issues that we could continue to make it work the way it used to. So.
Yeah, I mean, can we close this and open up, either reopen it or do a new one if you find that there's issues with Alpha 3?
Yeah, I can close it. Let me do it though, because what I think I'll do is it's that diagram there. I think I'll update it to what we expect it to look like for V1A3, so people will know like this is what it should look like for V1A3 if you're trying to do this. And I'll close it, and then if we do encounter issues, then I can open a new one.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, webhook conversions for machine resources should automatically update the API group conversion for Bootstrap references. So this is, let's say you have a V1 Alpha 2 machine and it's referencing a V1 Alpha 2 kubeadm config. This is a desire to change the API version for that reference kubeadm config from Alpha 2 to Alpha 3. Seems reasonable. I mean, it would be a special case for specifically kubeadm configs, but seems all right. Jason, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I just see this being something that is going to come up periodically as we upgrade from one version to the other, at least until we get to V1. Like something similar will happen in the future with the kubeadm control plane, for example, as well. And there's two aspects to it. One of it is that the object refs that we're using are basically saying that we should reference this as a specific type. And right now in the code, we're not actually using the API group and version info from there. So it's almost kind of misleading. So maybe we do need to go to just string references for these, and then we wouldn't even have to deal with any type of conversion around these.
Well, are you saying just have a name and not the kind?
Well, I mean, we would still need, I mean, this is where it gets tricky because, yeah, we do need to have the specific kind in there to look it up, but it's, for this particular case, as we update the kubeadm config, at some point, we're going to be leaving in an object reference in there that is no longer it's to an older version and no longer to a valid version, which prompted this issue. But we may want to look at potentially a different way to do the references so that we don't have to do these types of conversions, or even worse, put off doing these conversions to the user.
So worst case, it's a documentation issue. I don't anticipate that I don't really think we need to worry about the longevity of some of these resources given how we're still alpha. I do recognize that it's important to do as much as we can, but like to go from an Alpha 2 to an Alpha 3, if we give people a script or we include code to do the changes, like it's kind of best effort. And when we move to beta and GA, it's much more important. But so I'll put this in the milestone. I do want to put it as long-term, and we'll do help wanted. Is that fair?
It's probably not a good first issue, though.
Really? I mean, it could be.
I mean, what I was thinking is like this might have other implications that like need to be tested, like with external Bootstrap providers. So.
Well, this is specific to the kubeadm Bootstrapper.
Yeah. I want to think about this a little more, though. Like, I mean, you can assign it to me if you want. Because it provides like a one-off user experience for kubeadm, but not for infrastructure providers. And yeah, like might not be the best thing ever, I guess. Anyway, I can comment on the issue.
Okay. All right, we have this comment or issue about machines or machine deployments feel like they're stateless and machines maybe need identities or something. I think next, and we're still awaiting more evidence from the reporter in terms of following the feature request template, right?
Yeah, we're trying to understand like what the person is trying to do here, because it seems like a statement like after facts, but not like there's not like a real kind of like, I don't know what he's trying to do, like, you know. So trying to understand a little bit better.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully they will come back with the follow-up.
Yeah.
All right. Kubeconfig secrets not cleaned up when control plane machine is deleted. Created a cluster, got the 5 secrets. I deleted the control plane machine, and 4 of the 5 secrets went away. The kubeconfig secret is created and owned by the cluster, so that's why it's not going away when the control plane machine is deleted. I know we talked about moving this ownership around in the past. I think going forward with the kubeadm control plane, it's going to be owned by the control plane resource, right, Jason?
That's correct, yes.
So I think when you implement the control plane fully, this can be closed, or we can close it now and just say it'll be dealt with as part of the kubeadm control plane work. Any preference? All right, I'm just going to say the kubeadm control plane will own this going forward. I'm going to close it. It can get reopened if needed, and then we'll just close it again when the control plane's in. We talked about project roadmap. Here we have Drain library from Michael, or an update to it.
Yes, I've been adding lots of features to Drain in Kube Control. And so there's one feature in particular I think we should utilize, something that we've had a problem with downstream, and you probably have a problem with it upstream, but when you delete a pod and the node is unready, if that pod has local storage, that pod will be marked with a deletion timestamp. So eviction succeeds. And the pod will just never go away. So the kube control library, drain library, will just always fail due to timeout because it's waiting for the pods to go away and they don't. So this option is to allow exiting that wait for those pods, because if it has a deletion timestamp, that means PDBs have already been verified, it's been marked for deletion, it's just never going to go away because the kubelet's unhealthy. And so this is a pretty simple revendor, add new option type task. I just put it there for tracking, so anybody can pick it up.
Okay, I mean, is this something you'd have time to update and pull in, or are you pretty busy and you need somebody else to do it?
I could probably get to it in not too long. I mean, it's pretty trivial, but if somebody on the call is new and want an easy first task, they could do it.
Okay, I mean, it seems reasonable to put in the milestone, and if we need to bump it out because nobody gets around to it, so be it. And last one, spot instances support. Alberto, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Is this some, from a priority standpoint, is this something that Red Hat's looking to do sooner rather than later? Or
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a fixed deadline, but I'd say the sooner the better for us. And I really like the community to work together on this one and explore what's the best way to move forward.
Okay, yeah, and I saw Michael's comment earlier about doing this per provider, which I think may be the best thing in the short term. I haven't really thought about this in detail in terms of how it would impact machine sets and machine deployments, or if you could even use them and what that would look like. But I think it's worth continuing the discussion, and if we find out that it makes sense to do it per provider, for starters, then we can go that route. And I definitely think that we probably need issues in the providers too, to do it, to file RFEs for the spot instance support or whatever they're called in the various providers, and link back to this one and see what we can come up with. But at least in terms of like Alpha 3 timelines, I think unless somebody's got time to do this from start to finish, we're all pretty booked at this point.
Yeah, the question would be, what's start to finish?
Well, if you can get a design proposed and get everybody to have time to look at it and then implement it, that would be start to finish. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I suppose, like I said, if we can break this down into smaller pieces, like focus on the machine level first, figure out that abstraction, I think that's something that we could probably deliver sooner than later.
Yeah. Tim, you had your hand up. Do you have anything?
I lowered it. It sounds like you guys are figuring it out.
Okay. All right. That is all of the issues. I'll deal with the roadmap one. And does anybody have anything last minute you want to talk about? I see Flemmer.
Yeah, so you and I, Andy, spoke briefly at KubeCon about the Cluster API and the CI/CD pipeline for building the images and stuff like that. That is one thing that I'd like to be involved in. I have no idea who would be the right person to show me the ropes in the whole project lifecycle. And is there an issue open for this, or?
Let me file an issue or find one. And thank you for bringing that up. I think probably the easiest way for you to get a sense, or anybody to get a sense for what the releases look like, would be to hop on Zoom with one of us when we do one. What time zone are you in?
London.
London, okay, because we're going to do a Cluster API release soon. We may do it today, but I realize it's late for you at this point. So maybe we hold off until tomorrow, and we can do it earlier in the day so that you can see what the mechanics look like.
I just came back from the Pacific, the West Coast, 2 days ago, so I'm still in PST. So if you're doing it in a sensible time, I may be able to join.
Okay. Let me, I'll send an email to, I can do it to the Google group. I'll definitely have the issue, and I can put it in Slack, and we'll see if we can coordinate a time for people to hop on Zoom and see what a release looks like.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a good Wednesday, and we'll see you next week.